Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Be the air we breathe. Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Free us to receive. Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Be the air we breathe. Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Free us to receive. Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Be the air we breathe. Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Free us to receive. Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Be the air we breathe. Meet us in the stillness, Lord. Free us to receive.
Hello and welcome to this time of reflection for the week of September the 30th through to October the 6th. I want to just begin by making an announcement about recordings. So there is a recording of last week's worship service from September the 26th. It's a rough recording. You can find it on our YouTube channel or in the link where you have accessed this recording if you have accessed it through our e-newsletter. And I also want to let you know that on Sunday of this week, Sunday, October the 3rd, my colleague, Reverend Carla, will be hosting a Zoom coffee hour for those of you who have been looking forward to a time when you can gather again in that way. Carla will be really happy to gather with you, especially those of you who have not been able to come into the church and be present with us physically here. Today, the day that I am recording this brief reflection is September the 30th. So today is the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And so I am wearing an orange shirt to stand in solidarity with our Indigenous kin, especially those who have experienced the trauma of residential school, both from firsthand experience and through intergenerational trauma that has resulted from the residential school system. And my hope is that today you, along with me, will be spending time reflecting on and learning about the history of Indigenous peoples in this land, and reflecting on and taking action around moving towards a time of reconciliation for all the people who inhabit this beautiful country. So I want to begin, as we do each time we gather in this place, in this building, by acknowledging that this building is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And one of the truths that we would acknowledge today is that this land has never been handed over. It has never been given in any kind of formal or treated way. And so this land really does belong to the Indigenous peoples of this area, and we are grateful to them and to their ancestors for their careful stewarding of this beautiful land. Once there was someone who said such amazing things and did such wonderful things that people followed him. They wanted to know who he was. And once when they asked him who he was, he said, "I am the light of the world." In this community of faith, we would say that this is the light that unites us, even when we are not physically able to be together. This is the light that animates our living. This is the light that guides us on our way. And this is the light that calls us to be a people of truth and reconciliation. This Sunday, our theme for our worship service will be the tie that binds, united with the world. This Sunday marks the Sunday that is celebrated around the world, traditionally on this first Sunday of October, and it's known as Worldwide Communion Sunday. So we will be gathering at table, commemorating the meal that Jesus shared with his disciples on the night before he died, and feasting on a meal that feeds us for the work of justice and peace-seeking in our world. We'll be doing that here in this community of faith on Sunday, as people will be doing it all around the world. And for this Sunday, we have a reading from the Gospel according to Matthew. And usually what I ask you to do as I'm sharing these readings each week is to listen for a word or a phrase that resonates with you or shimmers for you. This week I want to invite you to pay attention to how this reading makes you feel, and which parts in it particularly evoke possibly a strong feeling from you. I'm reading from the 31st verse of the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. When the Son of Man, sometimes we translate that the human one, comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him. And he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food, and I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." And then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me, naked, and you did not give me clothing, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they will also answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" And then he will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." and these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Well, I know what feelings get evoked in me when I read this passage. It's that part about the judgment, the part about the goats that really kind of stirs things up in me. And I think that's because I just don't want to find out someday that I'm actually a goat and not a sheep. And so it makes me feel kind of on edge about my behavior in the world. Well, one of the things that I find really interesting about this passage is that everyone in this passage is surprised, both the righteous and the accursed, both the ones who have kind of done what they were supposed to do and the ones who have not done what they were supposed to do. Everyone is surprised. And it's the surprise of the righteous ones that I find so very interesting here, because the righteous ones seem surprised that they were doing anything that would cause them to be rewarded at the end of time, or that they were doing anything in such a way that would be actually seeing and tending Christ right in front of them. Earlier this week, one of my mother's nurses told me a story about herself. My mother resides in a long-term care facility, and one of the nurses, her nurse Edna, has been taking care of her for a very long time. Edna told me earlier this week that when she was young, she wanted to be a nun, and someone looked at her and said, you know, you're not going to be a nun, you're going to be a nurse. And there was something in her that resonated with that. So she went off and she trained to be a nurse. And just as she was finishing her nursing training, or just I think as she was beginning to practice nursing, she was here in Canada, and she found out that her grandmother had died at home in the Philippines, and she really wanted to go back and to honor her grandmother's life, but circumstances were such that she wasn't able to go back. And so she made a vow to her grandmother. She vowed her grandmother that every time she looked into the eyes of those she had been given to care for, and for Edna it has been people in long-term care for the duration of her nursing career, she vowed to her grandmother that when she looked at every single one of the people in her care, she would choose to see the eyes of her grandmother. She would care for her grandmother as she cared for my grandmother. My mother rather, she would care for my mother. I had this assurance that she is caring for my mother with the love and tenderness that she would care for her own grandmother. And I have to say that has proven to be true in my experience of Edna over these last number of years that my mother has experienced her care. When she told me this story the other day, I said to her, Edna, this is just like the story when Jesus says, you see me, you care for me when you care for those who are on the margins, for those who are ill, for those who are needing clothing and food and care, the ones society so often considers the least of these. I saw so much in her care, the kind of care that Christ calls forth from all of us. And I found myself wondering, what would our world really be like if all of us cared for one another, especially the ones we consider the least, with that same kind of love and care that Edna has, or that this story we have today tells us is the kind of care that makes our relationships with one another manifest the presence of Christ in our midst. One of my concerns during this time is that we've narrowed our vision. We've become kind of insular in these days, especially this last stretch of the pandemic that we've been journeying through. And I think the invitation of this passage and the invitation of Worldwide Communion Sunday is to really make sure that we continue to broaden our vision. We need to take care not just of the people that live within the borders of our country when it comes to making sure that vaccines are available. For example, we need to make sure that we continue to keep our gaze broadened and widened to take in the whole of the human family. This Sunday, we're going to be inviting people to write on a strip of fabric, strips of fabric that we've been tying on the lattice work out the front of the church. If you live in the area, maybe you have seen our ties out on the lattice in front of the church. We're going to be inviting people to consider a concern that we are connected with, that you as an individual are connected with or want to be connected with, a concern in our world. So who is it in our world for whom you have most strong concern? And by our world, I really am meaning the world beyond the borders or the boundaries of our own country. For whom do you have concern? For whom do you feel a connection? In whose eyes will you see the Christ? Watch carefully now. I'm going to change the light. Now this light that was in one place, let us remember that this light is in all places. It's on all people. It's in all creation. And we are called to go forth and to bear that light to one another. And we are called to look into the eyes, especially of those society considers to be the least, and to see in those eyes the eyes of Christ, the face of Christ. May it be so. Amen.
from